Did you throw it away? David demanded, his face flushed with anger. The $1,500 watch my father gave me for our daughter's birthday? I asked, my voice steady. Yes, I responded without hesitation. I threw it in the trash, and I'd do it again. His expression twisted in fury. Are you insane? Have you completely lost your mind? Maybe, I shrugged, unbothered, but the real problem isn't me. Take a closer look here. I pointed to a small detail on the watch. David's eyes narrowed. After a long, reluctant pause, he inspected it. His anger faded, replaced by confusion. As the truth sank in, his face drained of color. I'm Nicole, 29 years old. David and I got married a year ago, but we're living with his parents. My father-in-law has a knack for putting me down, constantly reminding me that I'm not good enough. You can't even make tea properly, he loves to say. Every day feels like a nightmare I can't escape, and I often wish I'd wake up from it. David and I met at high school, but only reconnected at a reunion. He confessed he'd always liked me, and we quickly started dating, leading to our marriage. I was ecstatic. I loved him, and I thought our life together would be everything I had hoped for, but in hindsight, I realize how naive I was. After our wedding, I moved in with David and his family. It didn't take long to see that my father-in-law was far from the ideal figure, a deeply old-fashioned man. He was the type who'd never dream of making his own tea. According to David, my father-in-law once told my mother-in-law that it was wrong for a woman to disobey a man. I was shocked when I heard it, and horrified when I realized it was true. Even worse, he held a deep prejudice against me. I'm an immigrant, and David's father wasted no opportunity to express his disdain. As an interpreter fluent in both English and Japanese, I took pride in my work, but my father-in-law couldn't understand that. He would criticize everything I did, calling my profession useless. What's wrong with you? Hating someone just for speaking English? Just because I'm foreign? I would think to myself as I tried to ignore his insults. He'd often mutter, I can't stand foreigners, and the words would stick in my throat. His judgment went beyond my job. He believed that because I wasn't Japanese, I wouldn't know how to prepare traditional meals or appreciate their culture. But I loved Japan. I had lived here for years and studied Japanese manners out of respect. One day, I confronted him. Even though I'm from a different country, I love Japan. Your behavior is embarrassing. He shot back, embarrassed? You should be ashamed of yourself for speaking to me like that just because I'm from another place. I kept my cool, though. He was David's father, after all, and despite his hateful words, I thought I could endure it. At first, I believed things would improve, that over time, my father-in-law would warm up to me, but his hostility never ceased. Every day, he gave me household chores as lessons on being more Japanese, cleaning, laundry, and even massaging his shoulders. It became clear that he had manipulated us into living with them just to make my life miserable. My mother-in-law would apologize for him, but she never intervened. She was stuck, unable to speak out, and I pitied her. But more than anything, I grew to loathe my father-in-law for controlling and belittling me. I hated how David's work kept him so busy, always traveling. I didn't want to burden him with my troubles, so I suffered in silence. Hey, it's time for lunch, get a move on, my father-in-law called from the kitchen. Since I worked from home, I was often stuck at my desk. I couldn't take breaks whenever I wanted. My interpreting assignments were unpredictable, and I needed flexibility, but my father-in-law didn't care. Hurry up, he snapped, this job of yours, it's no good. Don't you know it's customary to follow the wishes of your in-laws? You immigrants have no sense of that. His words stung like a slap. They made it even harder for me to focus on my work. His demands never stopped. Every morning, he ordered me to clean the house and follow ridiculous rules, like waiting until everyone had finished eating before I could leave the table. And when I was trying to work, he'd burst into my room. I don't want to hear English, he'd yell. It was too much. My patience had run thin. If I didn't do something soon, I'd lose my job. I was falling apart from the constant tension, the endless attacks from my father-in-law and the helplessness of my mother-in-law. I married David because I loved him, and I thought that no matter what else happened, we'd be fine together. But now, I see how naive I was. I can't live with my father-in-law like this anymore. I'm not happy at all, I thought to myself, tears starting to well up. The weight of it all was unbearable. That night, I finally decided I needed to talk to David about everything. As I told him what my father-in-law had put me through, the tears came rushing out. His face twisted with shock, and he seemed mortified by what I shared. He immediately apologized, his voice full of regret. I'm so sorry, Nicole, he said, his voice trembling. I had no idea. I promise. I'll make things right. I'll make you happy. David confronted his parents about the situation, and they were furious with me, but instead of backing down, David made a life-changing suggestion. Nikki, let's move out, he said. We don't need to live with my parents anymore. Let's find our own place, just the two of us. Are you sure? I asked, unsure of how to react. Absolutely, he reassured me, his voice firm. It's the best thing for us. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was like I could finally breathe again. I was so grateful to be with David. I truly believed everything would be okay now. We moved out shortly after, and from that point on, I never saw my in-laws again. David stood up to his father, and that was the end of the torment. Life started to feel like it had returned to normal. I could focus on my work and finally enjoy the freedom I'd been yearning for. I couldn't help but appreciate the simple joys in life, which I had once taken for granted. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. David was thrilled, his happiness shining through. Mom and Dad are excited too, he told me one day, mentioning that he'd shared the news of my pregnancy with my in-laws. That's great, I said, forcing a smile. On the surface, I was happy that they were pleased, but inside, my heart sank. It had been a year since that awful time, and I still couldn't shake the memories of what my father-in-law had done. Just because we're having a baby doesn't mean you have to see my parents, David reassured me. I don't want to do anything that'll make you uncomfortable. The most important thing is you and our baby, Nicole. I felt a sense of peace in those words. After everything, I was grateful that David understood. The birth of our baby was an overwhelming moment of joy. Our healthy baby girl gripped my hand with her tiny fingers, and all the pain I'd endured suddenly seemed insignificant. One evening, David looked at me with a serious expression. Would it be okay if my parents meet her? He asked softly. They were so happy when I told them she was born safely, and I know they're eager to see their granddaughter. He quickly added, I'm sorry, I told you before you didn't have to see them. I paused, taking in his words. It's fine, I said gently, I understand. It's natural for you to want your parents to meet her, even after everything. I know my father-in-law cared about you. I want to respect your wish. It's been a year since all that happened, and I believe he's had time to reflect. I'll go too. David smiled widely at my response. Yes, people can change, he said. Let's stay positive. On the day we left the hospital, David, our daughter, and I headed to my in-laws' house. I hadn't seen my father-in-law in so long, and I couldn't help but feel nervous. When we arrived, they greeted us warmly, and I was surprised to see my father-in-law smiling at our daughter. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe things could get better. Even my father-in-law seemed more pleasant, and there were no sarcastic remarks directed at me. Then he handed me a gift-wrapped box. This is for the birth of your child, he said, his voice unexpectedly kind. It's a $1,500 watch. Please display it. I was stunned. A $1,500 watch? It was so unexpected. My mother-in-law looked equally surprised. Don't be shocked, my father-in-law said with a small laugh. It's my way of thanking you for letting me meet my grandchild. Though I was taken aback, I felt a warm sense of gratitude. Maybe things were improving between us. Maybe my father-in-law had truly changed. My heart swelled with hope, and for the first time, I thought we might finally understand each other. Back at home, David and I opened the gift. We were both surprised when we saw the watch. It looked like an ordinary wristwatch. Nothing particularly special about it. We'd expected something flashier for a gift of that price, but it was a gesture, and that mattered. Just as we were processing the gift, the phone rang. It was my father-in-law again. Since we'd received the watch, he had been calling frequently, first to ask about his granddaughter, but then the tone started to shift. Do immigrants only clean once a week? He sneered during one call. You only had Japanese food twice this week. This is why foreigners are no good. His words began to get under my skin again. How did he know these things? I felt myself growing more anxious. How does he know all this? I asked David, my voice trembling. I don't know, David replied, confused. I was starting to feel trapped. My father-in-law's criticisms were becoming more pointed, more specific. It felt like there was no escaping him. Between managing work, caring for our baby, and dealing with his unrelenting calls, I was starting to crack under the pressure. I was in unbearable pain, my heart heavy with anxiety, and I couldn't help but cry. How can I get away from my father-in-law now? I thought, feeling trapped once again. I had managed to escape him by moving out, but here he was, tormenting me still. It felt like I was losing my mind. You'd have to be in my shoes to understand the intensity of what I was feeling. My skin crawled as I realized the full extent of his control over me. I tried to process everything that had happened. As I pieced it together, my body started shaking uncontrollably with fear. It was something I couldn't even fathom. But then, I looked at my sleeping child, so peaceful, so innocent. I have to protect her, I thought. And with that, I made a decision, despite the trembling in my limbs. That night, David came home from work, holding the watch in his hand. His face was filled with anger. "You threw it away?" he asked, his voice rising. "The $1,500 watch my father gave us for our daughter's birthday?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I threw it away, and I would do it again." David's anger flared even more. "You're insane. Are you out of your mind?" "I guess you could see it that way, but I'm not the one who's crazy here. Let me show you why." I pointed to the small black dot on the watch. "Don't press this button," I warned, my voice firm. David, still furious, did as I said, but his face quickly shifted as he realized something was off. "What is this?" he asked, his tone faltering. "Was it a reset button?" he muttered to himself. "No, take a closer look," I said, my voice steady but filled with dread. David squinted at the tiny black spot, and his expression changed completely. "A camera?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I confirmed. There was a hidden camera in the watch. My father-in-law had been watching us. The reason he knew every detail about what we were doing, the menu, the routine, was because he'd been spying on us this whole time. I was horrified when I found out. I had a professional check it out, and even debugged it. "It was all your father's doing." David stood there, frozen in shock, processing the gravity of what I had said. Then, slowly, his eyes softened, but there was an unmistakable determination in them. "Nicole, I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't believe this happened again. I'll never forgive my dad." The next day, David and I left our daughter with my parents and went to confront my father-in-law. When we arrived, David went straight to him, the watch in his hand, and put it on the table. "Dad," he said, his voice seething with anger, "do you know why we're here?" David's eyes burned with fury. "What are you talking about?" my father-in-law asked, his expression unreadable. David's voice rose. "You're insane. You gave us a watch with a hidden camera and a wiretap in it." But my father-in-law played innocent. "I don't know what you're talking about." David slammed his hand on the table, barely holding back his anger. "Oh, really? So, that's why the watch cost $1,500? And you didn't know?" My father-in-law refused to admit anything. "Do you have any proof?" he asked with a smug grin. David and I exchanged a look of disbelief. "We don't need proof," David said coldly, "but you will pay the price for this. You'll pay for the damage you've caused." Just as the tension peaked, my mother-in-law, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, her voice sharp. "You're the one who's going to pay," she said, glaring at my father-in-law, "because I'm divorcing you." "What?" my father-in-law blurted out, his face twisting in surprise, though it was clear he didn't take her seriously at first. After all, she had never stood up to him before. "I already told my mom everything you did," David continued, his voice firm. My mother-in-law's anger was palpable. "I went through your things, and I found videos of David and his family, of the house. It was all filmed and photographed without our knowledge." "I couldn't believe it was true," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Eavesdropping and photographing people like that, it's a crime." David pulled out receipts and order forms, placing them in front of my father-in-law. "This watch is custom-made," he said, his voice unwavering. "You ordered a hidden camera and a wiretap. We have all the proof right here." At that moment, my father-in-law's facade crumbled. With no way out, he finally confessed. "I lost my chance to tell Nicole how much I despised her," he muttered bitterly, "so I thought I'd just watch her, see her actions on camera." The room erupted in fury at his words. The fallout was swift. My mother-in-law divorced him. He had to pay alimony, and since the house was owned by her family, he was kicked out and now lives alone in a small apartment. My mother-in-law revealed that she had been enduring his oppressive behavior all these years, but when she saw what he'd done to me, she couldn't bear it anymore. She finally found the courage to leave him. Now, she lives freely and happily, no longer shackled by him. David and I cut ties with his father. Our bond grew stronger, and David changed jobs to spend more time with our family. We were able to openly communicate about everything. and our relationship flourished. I'm happier now than ever before. Happiness comes in many forms, and I've learned to cherish my own. No one should sacrifice their happiness for another's. I'm taking care of my own, and it feels right.